Steve Hoggins, A Philosophy of Education. I'll start out by saying I didn't like education. I got into education because I thought standing in front of a class might be fun and interesting, but I wasn't interested in education itself. However, over time I began to observe a lot of education and feel like this is about people. And I think people are important. I think people's interactions should be fulfilling and they should thrive as individuals. And the system of education puts these people together, and the process of education is through significant relationships quite often. So I find myself irrevocably drawn to this thing, education, and asking, what is it for, this thing? It seems like education is for reading, writing, maths. That's the curriculum. That's what it's for. That's what we should be teaching. The problem I have with these things is they're all quite contextual. They are things that are valued in our world and that we do in our world, and so it seems invariable that we'll teach them. But imagine a world where we didn't have land. We had boats and a universal religion, and the whole planet was covered in water. Well, then education would be for things like piety and teaching swimming, because that's the context that you live in. So I think what education is for in terms of its content is kind of up for grabs. What education should be for is focusing on how students approach that content. The business of education should be about the grammar of our thinking and about our ability to master skills and learn, whatever the content is. I think it's about the how-to of thinking and not the what to think or do. So, I think education should foster skills that are fundamental, that can be applied to a broad range of content. I think critical thinking, for example, is used in most, if not all, subjects. Evaluation, analysis, synthesis, reflection, creativity. These are all my kind of how-tos of education. The knowledge and skills content is up for grabs. You could be doing classical Greek or learning app design. The point is you can exercise those fundamental skills in both and use them and learn them to apply to others. So, should the curriculum change in light of what I've said? There's a distinction here. Yes, the curriculum will change in terms of its knowledge and skills content because it has to be a shifting composite of what the world is and what it values and what engages the students. But I don't think fundamental things should change, like thinking analytically and thinking creatively. They might shift slightly depending on the content that we're doing, but they should never be withdrawn from the curriculum. So if that's what I think a curriculum should it be compulsory? Well, education, it's kind of a difficult thing to work out because we have to say, well, education is kind of a primal function of humans. We grow and gain experience and get better at things. But what we really mean is like a system of education. And there's two thoughts about that as well, because one could be the schooling system of education. But I don't think that covers everything, because there might be in, say, the Amazon tribes, no schooling. But they will have a system of education, something like they oblige their younger members to follow, observe, and take part in activities that they think are important. So I think a system of education is wider than schooling, and so I think it's for everyone. I think it's for the young and the old, for all people, but it will change for them. I think, for example, it wouldn't be so compulsory for the old. Well, it should be insisted on. I think that's a better word than compulsory. Insisting on it for older people might not work so well. They may have other jobs, may not feel they need education, and might react negatively to being forced to be educated. But we should encourage them that we give them the opportunities to be able to educate themselves and encourage it, whether it be autodidact or otherwise. I think when they're young and there's a 5-year-old that doesn't want to be educated or would rather choose something other in education, I think we have an obligation to insist hard there. And by insist hard, I mean to the point where it effectively is compulsory, though they acknowledge there are situations where it may not be appropriate. So if that's the education, and I think we should insist on it, what's the role of the teacher? I think teachers do a lot of things, varied things, knowledge tests, inquiries. They all seem quite different things, but I think fundamentally they're all getting at something like our role is to foster the flourishing of skills, abilities, and habits in our students. And they might do this through a lecture, or perhaps to use an inquiry. Or maybe there's a knowledge test that they need to do, or something different, like a formative assignment. The point is they will use whatever tools are at their disposal to the end that they're aiming for, which is the flourishing of individuals. And I think that's right. Whether they're expert or not, I don't think should be debated. They do need to be an expert, but we need to say what kind of expert. Should they be an expert in the subject or an expert pedagogue? For example, Albert Einstein was an expert in science, but I hardly think he'd be the best person to teach my Year 4 science class. The expert pedagogue would probably be able to go in there. But then if they had to teach something like centrifugal force, I don't think they'd be best placed. Because, for example, I don't understand centrifugal force. I'm told it's not a force. I've Googled it. It's not a force. But it's certainly talked about as one. And I don't understand why physicists are telling me it's not a force. So I definitely wouldn't be well placed to teach that. So I think they need to be both of those things going on. And I think sometimes we have to tell the children the knowledge, and at other times we need to elicit their knowledge so we can bridge the gap between the two. And so in that sense, I think there needs to be both of these things. I don't think an expert will be going into the classroom, an expert in the field like Albert Einstein will be going to the classroom so much. So the way to put that person in the classroom is a high quality communication between both the pedagogues and the experts in the fields. And that's part of teacher education. So what then is the role of the student? This is the difficult one for me because I think there are fundamental skills and of what the student should do and learn. However, there are certain dichotomies that I think are difficult. So memorizing facts and applying knowledge is often thrown up as a kind of dichotomy. I don't think it is. I don't think many educators would necessarily think it is. I think maybe you need to memorize some facts to apply knowledge. So they're both going to form part of the curriculum. Learning to behave in the world is going to be part of what they do, because if you behave in a world that is totally asocial to the rest of the world, it's not going to work for you very well. I think learning to reason is one of the fundamental ones. But also then forming opinions and making decisions will be part of that. I think learning to learn is quite fundamental because it enables you to access more education. Yeah, there's still situations in which reasoning is not always the best approach because you need to act intuitively. And there's still going to be situations in which making a decision is not necessarily the best thing to do. The how, again, has these problems. So, do children learn best independently of a teacher or with a guiding mentor of some sort? I think that will depend on the age of the pupil and the skill of the teacher and the context that they're in. The same with groups or independents. I think there are groups that will be able to go to group tasks very well, but I think there are independent tasks that need independent approach. But equally, I think there might be groups that would take well to traditionally independent tasks. So I don't think it's clearly decided what is the best, and I don't think it will be clearly decided. I think the same about mixed ability, although more research will be done. Mixed genders seem to me the least controversial one, but there are societies where the societal differences between the genders, or the value systems between the genders, are so extreme that trying to educate them together would be such an anathema that they simply wouldn't learn, they wouldn't be engaged in learn. So when I think about what the role of the student is, I think all of the generalizations we've made are not helpful, especially if we're making decisions at a system level, because it ignores the nuanced situations and the counterexamples. So I find this very difficult. a case-by-case basis for each student, but then I am unable to say what the role of a student is. I can only say what the role of one particular student is. It's difficult. So in summary, my thoughts on education is that it's fundamentally human, and it's not a tool for something else. It's about the flourishing of these humans, these individuals. It shouldn't be used to promote democracy. It shouldn't be used to affect social change. I think that's using education as a tool. But I think it's intrinsically valuable in itself to get people to flourish. I think teachers are the critical point in the education system. Whatever happens with the government, the curriculum, the school management, the behaviour, a good teacher, an expert teacher, will be able to save that student. If everything in the system fails, then a teacher can enable a student to succeed in spite of all of that. A good teacher, an expert teacher. And equally, a poor teacher would fail a student, even if everything in the system was good and sorted. And I think students are complicated. I think trying to make general statements about students is very complicated because they're humans and they don't seem to follow mechanical operations. I think that's the point of education as well. That's why it's a social science, not a hard physical science. It's very complicated. And I think that's why, in the end, whatever generalizations, whatever theories, whatever philosophies we come up with to talk about education, our answers to the problems of education should always be tentative, because we might run across those nuanced situations, and we should always be prepared to re-evaluate our views in the light of new evidence. Those are my thoughts on education. Thank you.